Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Sudabe. I am an independent illustrator and icon designer, and today we are going to talk about composition and how we as artists and designers can create compositions that feel right and drive engagement. Here are my top tips. Number 1, follow your intuition. A bit cheesy, but before we dive into more technical tips, I'd like to stress that there are no instruments or formulas to measure the forces that affect your composition. Instead, use your eyes and intuition when creating your piece. So that is why my first tip is to try not to be perfect, but go with what feels right. Number 2, balance. Balance is one of the most important elements of a composition. Without visual balance, viewers might not see all the areas of your design or illustration. Yet balance does not only mean perfect symmetry, like we see here. There is also asymmetrical balance, radial balance, and mosaic balance. Depending on your style or on the story you are telling, you can pick any of these. When talking about balance, visual weight plays an important role. Visual weight is the notion that certain design elements can appear to be heavier than others. Even if you have two shapes of the exact same height and width, the darker one will always feel heavier than the lighter one. It's not an exact science, and it has a lot to do with individual perception, so that's why the first rule was to really trust your eyes rather than precise measurements. Number 3, grids. A great way to guide yourself is by using some of the most famous guidelines in history, like the rule of thirds, which is used by beginners and experts alike. It shows you where to place your focal point and all other major elements depending on where these 9 rectangles intersect. In this example, here you can notice how I've used the rule of thirds to frame my composition and to understand where to place the objects. We also have the golden ratio, which is another tried and tested method. It's harder to use, but it's an amazing way to achieve a more dynamic composition. This artwork by Da Vinci, or this one by Hokusai, is a great example of the golden ratio in action. Then there's the centered composition, where your main character or your main focal point is at the middle of your piece. This is one of my favorite compositions and stylistic choices. I tend to place my main character in the middle and add elements around it. Number 4, keep the movement and flow. So we talked about the focal point. This is the key element to any good composition. That's where your viewer's eyes naturally settle first, and if the case, set the focal point to be the main character of your illustration, be it a person or just a cup of coffee. From your focal point, use strong directional lines that build into the element of your illustration. This visual force will make your composition more dynamic. But if your piece is calmer, like mine, use flowing elements, maybe like a curling seam or just some strokes and shapes in your background that are not crazy dynamic, but they give a sense of movement. One more thing on this topic, make sure you do not fill up your entire canvas and you let your elements express themselves by surrounding them with a good amount of negative space. This way, your focal point can act as a focal point, and your other elements support it. I personally like to create negative space with a generous amount of neutral tones that lets my artwork breathe. Number 5. Use various contrasts. For one, we have the contrast in size between elements. Contrast in size help create visual hierarchy, depth and can even tell the story. Also, consider the fact that many small elements will counterbalance one large one. This is why I like to have all these smaller ovals surrounding my big background shape. And don't be afraid to make some exaggeration for the sake of the composition either, because that will give your work more character. But you can also contrast with shapes to create an interesting balance. I tend to use a lot of rounded shapes, but they will always contrast with straight lines or sharper corners. Finally, we have contrast in color. Visual art should have a full range of values from dark to light and from bright to neutral in order to feel balanced. Be mindful also of the visual weight here. Not only do dark objects feel heavier than light ones, but also warmer tones weigh more than cold ones. When in doubt, use color harmonies, as they were specifically created to balance out the color spectrum. I choose this color harmony here and opt for some fairly vibrant greens, reds, and oranges. They contrast nicely with each other, and the generous amount of negative space allows me to use more saturated tones. These are my top tips for you guys. I hope that this video gives you the confidence to try different techniques that will help you achieve a better composition. Like and subscribe, let us know what you think, and we'll see you in our next video.